Chapter 29, Hedonism. The classroom was a sea of bowed heads, the sound of scribbling pens filling the room. Hushed voices and quiet chatter surrounded the two boys, working silently side by side. Occasionally, their elbows brushed together and their knees bumped against one another. Dorian was completing the task the teacher had set while Corey was merely doodling in his notebook, disregarding the rest of the world. Miss Safar glanced around before approaching their desk and kneeling down in front of Corey. A smile spread across her face. "Your poem won," she whispered. Dorian's eyes lit up and without thinking, he flung his arms around the smaller boy, pulling him into a tight side hug. "Well done, Dorian," Corey scolded firmly, pushing him away and trying to squirm out of his grasp. Dorian's face fell and he cleared his throat awkwardly, a small apologetic smile surfacing on his face. "Sorry," he murmured. "Congratulations, Corey," Miss Safar continued, dismissing the strange interaction. "This is a great achievement. What does he get?" Dorian pressed eagerly, leaning over the table, trying to burrow his way into the conversation. Miss Safar rose her brows. Pride?" He frowned. "Well, that's hardly a Dorian," Corey hissed. "I'll email you the details later, Corey." She smiled at him. "Well done. Thank you," he breathed, watching her stand to her full height and walk back towards her desk. When the lesson finished, Dorian grabbed a handful of Corey's knitted burgundy jumper and tucked him into the boys' locker room. The second the door shut, he slammed his lips against his while his long fingers knotted into Corey's frizzy locks. When he pulled away, he grinned lazily. "I'm really proud of you." Corey glanced around the empty room hesitantly. It smelled of mildew and stale sweat, the shower dripping disruptively in the corner. He bit his lip, his fingers carelessly caressing Dorian's built chest. "I'm missing philosophy." "Then miss it." That was all the encouragement Corey needed to stand on his tiptoes and connect their lips feverishly, hooking his arms around the back of Dorian's neck. They kissed desperately and clumsily, their lips aching and breath running out as they absorbed each other's entire existence. They stopped when a Year 10 class filed into the changing room, their kits slung lazily over their shoulders. Dorian pulled Corey back into the corridor, licking his lips, tasting the sweet shadow of Corey's mouth. The hall was empty and the air was silent. "Do you want to head home?" Dorian suggested darkly. "It's 11:30. Corey frowned. Dorian grinned, slipping his slender fingers through Corey's belt loops, pulling his hips onto his own until their bodies were pressed close together. "Let's skip." Corey was torn, his instinct fighting his rational nature. He knew what he wanted to do and he knew what he should do. But he was a strong believer in hedonism, living for pleasure alone. He craved satisfaction, whatever form it may take. May that be intellectual or of the senses, reading a good book, eating good food, or having good sex. Right now, he knew exactly what he wanted. So, his instinct won. "Okay." Dorian looked surprised at his response, but only for a moment. They slipped out of school unnoticed and headed home, their minds whirling with the prospect of what would happen next. Corey was ready. He'd always been ready, and if Dorian was up for it, he wouldn't hesitate. He wanted to touch him and be touched by him. He wanted to feel the heat, the passion, the lust. It wasn't about love or caring for one another. It was about fulfilling a craving. And by mixing that with the tornado of emotions he had for the other boy, he was ready. When they got home, they practically leapt at each other, their lips attached immediately. Their hands touched every part of each other that they could reach. Silky hair, burning cheeks, cold fingertips, smooth skin. They wordlessly decided to go to his bedroom and ascended the stairs with interlocked hand. Chapter 30, Rena Descartes. Corey dreamt soundly as images of beauty drifted past his consciousness. He dreamt of Dorian's eyes and calloused fingers. He dreamt of mud stains and tattered uniforms, faded from years of use. He dreamt of dripping taps and dying plants, black ink smudged over white skin and the fresh smell of a new tennis ball, pencil shavings and crumpled paper, fragmented words and half-completed poems, rusty typewriters and long-forgotten libraries, unread books and memories of authors destroyed by their own alluring intellect. He dreamt of Dorian Gray, a novel that disgusted Victorian society had held a mirror up to their faces and forced them to confront the terrifying reality that they themselves had created. Because that's what all good literature did. It made people find fragmented pieces of themselves in characters, in words, in perfectly crafted sentences. It awakened them to the oppression they had created, the hate and the discrimination. It all traced back to civilization, the destroyer of mankind. Corrupt and ruined and impure. Great storytellers recognized the dangers of living a civil life, and they challenged it. But they weren't understood, they were just punished for stating the obvious. Because people didn't appreciate mirrors. They pointed out their flaws and their imperfections. Humankind would much rather live in constant oblivion than rip the mask off their own face and view the monstrosity that lurked beneath. Their naked soul, exposed for the world to see. But just like everything else in this disorganized world, the existence of a soul was debatable. As one ancient philosopher once preached, the only thing we cannot doubt is that we are doubting. Corey vaguely traced the concept back to René Descartes, but he couldn't be sure. To him, the mere existence of doubt meant that everything around us may not even exist. We may be trapped in a stimulation, a dream, a fantasy crafted by the mind. To Corey, the existence of a soul was something he had spent many hours theorizing about. Perhaps we were merely our physical selves, made up of bones and matter. Our brain was the mind and the mind was the soul. Or perhaps there was more to it than that. Perhaps the bundle of emotions, senses, experiences, memories all merged together to create the concept of the self. And maybe that was the soul. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just us, as we are, untouched by any supernatural forces. Corey wasn't sure he believed in a soul, but he liked to think it existed. A force buzzing warmly in his chest, living with him for eternity. An entity which lived prior to his birth, and will continue to live long after his death. An eternal cloud of him, of everything that made him into what he was. His mind tugged back to Oscar Wilde's novel, a book about a beautiful young man who sacrificed his entire existence for eternal youth. He watched his soul grow and decay on a dusty canvas while his porcelain skin and scarlet lips remained fresh with adolescence. Despite the precedence Wilde gave to youth and beauty, his story held true understanding of the soul. That decay happens within, no matter how old you are or what you look like. If Corey's soul was displayed on a canvas, he wasn't sure what he would see. A mess of black and white, lacking color or light. Scars and scowls, sour expressions. Dorian's soul would be beautiful. Not grey, the other one. His Dorian. It would be bright and vibrant and playful. Scars of trauma shadowed by happy smiles and a shining personality, gleaming even in darkness. Corey still didn't know how he had ended up with Dorian, someone so happy. They were like the sun and moon, day and night, smiles and frowns, laughter and tears. Complete opposites, and yet, Dorian has chosen Corey. And Corey decided that as long as Dorian wanted him, he wouldn't question it. He was comfortable and he was happy, that was all that mattered. When his eyelids fluttered open, he noticed he was alone again. The bed was growing cold and the clock, chapter 31, now isn't forever. Would you like whipped cream? Corey asked the customer politely from over his shoulder. That'd be great, hun. Thanks. She replied. He finished up the drink and slid the hot chocolate over the counter. She thanked him, paid, and took a seat with her two sons in the corner of the cafe. They hadn't received many customers today, and although Corey was thankful that it resulted in him having to do minimal work, he was always on edge when alone with Arthur. He preferred to be surrounded by other people, at least it meant he was safe. Corey was wiping down the coffee machine where he'd spilt a jug of boiling milk. He was thinking about Dorian, like he so often was. His boyfriend was at the gym with Ty today, and they were planning on all meeting up at Velvet's place later. He could hardly wait to finish his shift and get out of the sickly decorated shop. The pink frills and plastic flowers always succeeded in giving him a headache that refused to subside. He flinched as his boss brushed past him. How's it going, Corey? Arthur asked, standing far too close for comfort. Good, thank you. Corey responded thickly. Keep it up. Corey could only picture the menacing smile ghosting the man's features. And then, Arthur's hand grazed his lower back and fell down to give him a firm squeeze. Corey gulped and paled. Did he seriously just grab my arse? He forced himself to take a few deep breaths and calm down. He continued working while Arthur busied himself with the cake display. The rest of the day dragged on far too slowly for Corey's liking, but finally, it was time to close up. This was Corey's least favorite part of the day. He dreaded it. Arthur always locked the doors while they finished their cleaning, and it made Corey incredibly uncomfortable. His hands shook and palms sweated as he mopped the floor, trying to finish as quickly as possible. When he entered the stockroom to grab a fresh bin bag, he felt a presence behind him. You worked great today. Arthur's tone was darker, and when Corey turned around, He caught a glimpse of hunger in his eyes. "Thanks." He tried to shove past him, but the older man grabbed his wrist. His mind flashed with images of his father squeezing him, pinning him down, hurting him until he screamed. It took everything Corey had not to cry. "What's the rush? My boyfriend's picking me up in 10 minutes. He lied." He was planning on meeting Dorian at Velvet's, and now he was beginning to regret not asking his boyfriend to pick him up straight from work. 10 minutes is a long time. Arthur shot back hauntingly. "You can do a lot in 10 minutes. We need to finish closing a." Arthur threw Corey against the wall and he groaned in agony, crumbling to the floor. Suddenly, Arthur was his father. And his father wanted to hurt him. "Pete, please, yeah. I know you want it." Arthur stood over him, tugging at his belt buckle purposefully. "You've wanted it from the day you walked in. And no." Tears were streaming down Corey's face as he stumbled to his feet. "Pete, please don't do Thesa." "Oh, but I want to. And I'm your boss, you do what I want." Arthur laughed sweetly. He suddenly seemed decades older than 20-something. He was barely even human anymore. He was a monster, an animal, a beast. He was Corey's nightmare. He wrapped his fingers around Corey's wrist and pulled the small boy towards him, almost making Corey trip over a broom. He slammed him against one of the creaky old fridges and slapped him across the face, hard. Corey whimpered and Arthur did it again. "Will you stop crying, you fucking attention seeker?" Arthur rolled his eyes. "Don't act like a little virgin all of a sudden. I see the way you act. You're just a slutty whore, so don't pretend you're not." Corey cried out in pain as Arthur spun him around and smashed his face against the door of the fridge. His cheek was pressed up against the cold metal as Arthur pulled at his trousers impatiently. "Arthur?" A gentle feminine voice, "Cal."